It is a pleasure for me to moderate our panel this morning where we are going to be discussing no nonsense about AI, how to cut through the hype and how to figure out the best path to creating real value. I'm pleased to welcome our panelists. I'm Gustav Hoyer. I'm the Senior Vice President for Architecture and Engineering for a fiber network company, Zayo, that has roots here in Indianapolis. And I have been focusing on AI strategy for my own company and figuring out how to answer some of the questions you're going to hear from our panelists. This morning we have Zach Cardwell, who's the CEO and data scientist of Data 317, and he's also the Indy Hackers board president. We have Tyler Foxworthy, who's the founder of Meristem Capital, and he's an investor. And we have Amrutha Pulakotil, founder and chief data scientist at Equitable, and also with the Indy Hackers. She's with board member. So we're going to get right to it, and I want to begin with our first question, and this will give our panelists an opportunity to briefly introduce themselves. But I'd also like to hear about, instead of talking about all the great, glorious, shining promise of AI, let's talk about when you have seen it not go so well. So by way of introduction, as we move down the panel, tell us a little bit about yourself with your experience with AI and that worst or least impressive application of AI or data science.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out today. As Gustav mentioned, my name is Amrutha. Fun fact about it, my name actually means immortality, and I've spent about the last decade studying mortality in different ways. So it's more about what causes disease, what are some of the social factors that impact the diagnosis, prevention, and treatment of disease. And with that, I'll say one of the worst kind of uses of data science or AI I've seen is I worked at a company many years ago at this point that was trying to predict from their cohort who was likely to get pregnant. And so in the healthcare space, there is just and I understand their intention, which was to be able to predict costs, but there's a huge liability portion that it seemed we missed until a little bit more discussion. I think that was an idea that didn't take off, and I'm personally very glad it didn't. So.
Great. Okay.
All right. I'm Zach Cardwell. I'm the CEO of Data 317. I'm also lucky enough to be the board president of Indy Hackers. I've been bouncing around the data science and AI space for about 10 years at this point. Both of these folks, we've worked together a bit in various different capacities. And the worst story that I have might be a little longer, might have to give an abbreviated version, but once upon a time at a company way back when, they wanted to invent a search engine. And the idea with the search engine was that you could query something about health records and get information back. So like how much are you spending on various kind of diagnoses and that sort of thing. Really cool AI stuff. This was before ChatGPT and all that stuff. Got really, really excited. We started talking about the math, the linear algebra that it takes in order to do it. And the product folks instead decided, that sounds really complicated. What we're going to do instead is invent all the ways, all the things that you could search against this database and then string match against it. And so that's what they did. And they had to hire an employee to do that. That cost about $250,000 a year. And it was something else. Like we had the beginnings of a vector database, and that was quite something to see at that organization.
So, yeah, that was a good one. So, Zach and I have worked together many times over many, many years. But so I'm Tyler Foxworthy. I've been in the data science space for at least the last 15 years or so. I've worked in a number of local tech companies here in the Indianapolis area, spanning from MarTech, SaaS to management consulting. I started my last business in 2018, which was an AI software consultancy that was acquired in 2021. Since then, I've spent a lot of time as an operating partner in private equity, and then recently in the last year, I also launched my own quantitative hedge fund. So still very much applying math, but applying math in a more directed, more direct, goal-directed way now. So having a lot of fun. So thinking back about horror stories, if I go back maybe 10 years probably or so.
Just about.
So, Zach and I were working on a project together with a government agency that shall not be named. But there's an old saying: never depend on someone understanding something when their job depends on not understanding it. And so this was a fraud detection project with a government agency, and they're dealing with members of the public who could be submitting records of various type in order to receive compensation. And so we were using a variety of machine learning techniques back then, but I would describe the real secret sauce behind this was actually something very simple. It was a technique called Benford's Law, and basically it's the best way to summarize it would be that when people try to be random and make numbers up, it's not the right kind of random. Real randomness has a different characteristic distribution than when people make things up. And so we were able to apply that with some cleverness on the machine learning side to find just an absolutely enormous amount of fraud. And we could see it plain as day in the data. And the client would not accept it. It was politically unpalatable that there could be that much fraud, waste, and abuse in this particular government agency program. And so, from that time on, it really made me think at the outset of any project, not just how do I solve this mathematically, what's the statistically correct answer, but how do you think about the social and psychological elements behind framing of problems and delivering a solution. So it was definitely a very valuable lesson that I've never forgot since.
Thanks for kicking us off with some maybe less than desirable approaches. Let's now reverse order, and I'd love to hear, okay, we've heard what didn't work. What's something that was noteworthy for being the proper application of data science or AI tools, and maybe an outcome associated with that? So why don't we start, and we'll do it in reverse order.
Reverse order, okay. Well, there's a lot of really fun ones over the years, and I would say of all of them, the ones that I've enjoyed the most have not been the most technically advanced projects. They've been the ones that were the most elegant, that relied on some very simple generative property of the data or the system in question. So I think back to one that I'm probably the most proud of and was also very slick. Back during COVID, we worked with a number of school districts, and as many of us who have kids can remember, schedules got really messed up when they were trying to figure out how to, do social distancing and all these things. And so, for those that don't know, school districts spend the better part of a year planning the schedule for the following year, and they mostly do it by hand. It is a very complex problem because it's an enormous optimization problem. You got to figure out how to get all the right butts in the right seats at the right time, and make sure that all these kids get the credits that they need in order to be able to graduate. And so it's a very high-dimensional combinatorial optimization problem, and it's just really nasty. And so imagine being a school administration and having to completely change everything in a matter of weeks, not months, not even weeks. And so what we did is we actually looked at their existing schedule and treated it and turned the whole school into we're able to basically map a representation of the social network of the school based on which students would be in class together at the same time. And so, like a social network graph, we'd create an edge between students if they shared FaceTime in a class at any point during the day. And so we turned this problem of trying to figure out what is the optimal schedule which reduces the number of face-to-face connections between students in a day. So it reduces the degree connectivity of the individuals while minimizing the distortion to their actual class schedule. So how could you repartition it in terms of alternating days versus blocks and that type of thing in order to minimize the number of face-to-face connections? And we turned it into a machine learning, combinatorial search optimization problem. We were able to come back with an optimal solution in a couple days, which would have taken, they wouldn't have got there on their own outside of a couple of months. But I'd say that was probably the thing that I'm most proud of, and was a great, elegant application of math. And there's a lot of other good ones over the years, but I think that one really stands out.
Yeah, that was a fun one. I was part of that project back in the day with it, and one of the things that I think that is a hallmark of a successful product, of a successful AI project or technology project in general, is when you can really, really get to the fundamentals about how the problem actually works and what is going on with it. So the example that I have is, believe it or not, a little startup that we both were at back in 2016, 2017, we had a working version of ChatGPT. And we didn't use an attention mechanism. We kind of had a variant of an attention mechanism. But what we leveraged was, if you look at text that people come up with, when you're typing it out, when you're talking, whenever you're saying anything, about 6% of the time, the word that you're saying is the, or shorter words and that sort of thing. We have this natural compression that happens in our language, and we're redundant. And so what you can do, you can leverage that to say, hey, if you're using certain terms more than what you would expect, the author or the speaker is going out of their way to say it. And by leveraging that part and seeing how you can generate text around it, text generation has been around for a while. The real trick is knowing what text to generate. We were able to look at thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of blogs and summarize them right away back in 2016, 2017, around that time period. And not only were we able to do that, but we did it on an online fashion using some really, really clever tricks from the Bell Lab days. And it was Gen AI before it was cool, which was a lot of fun. I think we actually chased the patent on it or something, right? Yeah. So that's probably the best one.
I'm right there.
All right. My story is around COVID. So 3 to 4 years ago, I worked for a consulting company that was hired to help with the state's COVID response. And one of the many tasks we had was actually to predict the hospitalizations, deaths, unfortunately, and also things like vent utilization. And I still remember, I'm originally from India, but I remember telling my boss about 2 weeks before the state of Indiana shut down how fun it would be to work on this challenge, because I'd already heard of COVID cases in other countries. 3 years later, it's still the highlight of my career, but I bring it up because it was such a complex problem to solve that none of us had really tried to solve before. But apart from and what we ended up doing, if you're curious, is really building a simulation of the state of Indiana. And we would do things like we would shut down Ball State, IU, and Purdue when they decided to cut down on classes, and we would basically model what it looked like to not have that transmission between people occurring through classes and lunches and things like that. But the point I wanted to come across with is that the biggest thing that made us successful there is that during the pandemic, there was an emergency response, obviously. So data sharing agreements between hospitals and labs and things like that were much quicker. They were cleaner as well. And we also worked with multiple agencies and people. And so to me, we always say this, but rubbish in, rubbish out. If you don't have good data, you're just very limited by what you can produce. And then the second thing for me that made it a success is actually the context. I'm not a medical doctor, but I've always worked in the healthcare space. And so I think if you're able to actually engage with the subject matter experts and hear what they can add to the story, to your mathematical formulas, that's when you'll see the most success.
Great, a nice cross-section. And a question that arises from this, when you look at the extreme of didn't go well, some of the didn't go well had to do with the misapplication of techniques to a problem space. Some of what went well were the fit of the analytical method to the problem space. So there is the technical elegance. But at the end of it all, to put the time and the energy in, you need to know that it's going to generate real value. And one of the questions that I'm struggling with as I consider, sorry about tapping the microphone, as I consider the strategy for my company, how do we make sure that of all the things that are possible, and even some of which are interesting or desirable, which ones will be valuable? And the question of KPI or measuring those outcomes comes. So just to mix it up a little bit, Zach, when you talked about that pre-ChatGPT generative AI and you were on the cusp of something novel at the time, how how did you plan to measure value created? And I don't know if there's a full story around that or a different example, but KPIs maybe.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's actually a good example. We were so early at the time that it was really difficult to put a metric around that. And that is one of the things that you get with experimental work. Like sometimes it is hard to say this is going to yield this kind of value. And if we knew what we had at the time, we'd probably be, well, we'd be quite rich, so to speak. But here's the thing, with any of these things, with analytics, high-end technology, and that sort of stuff, I think people kind of take an approach of all or nothing, and that's where these things fail. It's all this, it has to hit all these things, do it all 100% well, or it doesn't work. And the fact of the matter is, most of these methods, if you walk up the complexity ladder, if you start with an approximation and make it better and better, you can incrementally move your way and test business value. The biggest mistake that happens in AI companies, from what I see working at Data 317, is that people get too invested in an idea before they have any signal that there is going to be value in that idea. And so what you do is start small, produce something, see if it actually solves a problem that you care about, and then iterate very, very quickly. A lot of times these initiatives are just too large. People want to build a rocket without knowing how to fly, and it gets you into a whole bunch of trouble. KPI-wise, I mean, really it's producing something of value, not just a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint. You know, did I push code? Can it be used by the engineering organization? Can I actually see the results from it? Do we have metrics around it? Hard questions that you would ask in any scientific study. And you know, if you're thinking about generic implementations of AI or that thing, there are variants of that exist with large organizations looking at ChatGPT or what have you.
So to pick up the thread of the KPI, Amrutha, maybe you can share a little bit in your experience, a specific measure. And when you describe KPI or business value created as an executive in my company, I wouldn't view deployment as business value created. That measures activity, that doesn't measure value. So the question of the right way to measure, was the problem worth solving, and do we spend the right amount of money solving it?
Well, so I would actually kind of push back a little bit on that. At the end of the day, the business value is going to come from the things that are actually delivered. It's really easy to talk a big game in this business and, you know, give purported business value and that sort of thing and not actually deliver results. And being on the constant stream of delivery, testing the hypotheses, getting it into production, doing things that are of merit and that sort of thing. Again, you won't get to 100% right away, but I mean, that has been the path that I have seen work. As much as you know, you're more the executive than I am. So
well, I would make the distinction between internal operational improvement efforts, so leveraging AI and data science for moving, you know, very well understood KPIs, things like churn, you know, growth rates, that type of thing, you know, EBITDA margins, versus you know, return on investment for net new product innovation. Those are a lot harder things to forecast, because you're basically trying to say, like, well, if I build it, will they come? It's a very different kind of forecast than saying, okay, I have these levers within this business, and if I dial them up, then how, you know, and you could kind of Monte Carlo your way through the set of, you know, potential outcomes. So I would make that distinction. But in any case, thinking about the distribution of likely outcomes and then trying to assign, you know, a probability to each of those, you know, outcome. So what is the likelihood that you're going to double, let's say, or, you know, you're going to cut your churn rate in half if you adopt this, you know, particular AI chat agent? Well, that is not likely. Could you move it 10%? And then what is the minimally viable experiment that you would need to develop in order to test that hypothesis for the least amount of capital?
Yeah, I'll add, like, before I started my own consulting agency, I worked for other consulting companies, and I would help build their data science department. And I really hope my former boss is not here. If you are, I'm sorry for this analogy. But I used to always, like, as a manager in the data science department, like I felt too close to the sun. And what I mean by that is like I was very close to the business owners and stakeholders, and I also had to direct the work to the data science team. And anytime something didn't work out so well or that I had to remedy, it was pretty much always because the business owners or the people who needed a solution weren't very clear about their needs or what it was costing them when we didn't fix something fast enough. And so, sorry if you're here, but it was fun being close to the sun because I love adding context to data. But it also wasn't fun because you could just see how it was hurting and like the costs that were seeping out of this business that quite frankly, I wanted some of that money too, right? Whether it's for my own bonus, for hiring another team member, it's not fun kind of seeing money being wasted. And so when it comes to KPIs, there's the standard things like you're looking for cost savings or new revenue. Something I think people miss is just the time back that other individuals who were doing something manual or with an outdated process can get back to be more creative and come up with other products or other innovations. And then something else that I think people kind of forget to track a lot, and I've had this happen to me so many times, is you build something, you think it's beautiful, it's your child, it looks super cute, but then people don't use it or they don't use it enough. And so something is, and actually when Zach and I worked together many years ago, they actually built this into a script that our department was using, but they tracked our usage stats, which was actually really great because it told us whether we were using it enough, whether it improved our processes, but that also taught me that what data scientists and AI builders need to do or get better at is once you build something is to make sure that you're actually training your users, that you're actually explaining the value add to them. Otherwise, things just get lost in like GitHub, honestly. So.
Yeah, I would say I don't think it's unique to data science or AI, but really any technology solution runs the risk of becoming an end in itself. It might be elegant, it might be well engineered, it might be the perfect answer to the question, but when it comes time to consider how much you're spending as an organization to produce that, whatever it is, AI model or that technical answer, does it in practice generate real value for the firm? And that is an interesting question that you touched on, because the opportunity cost, it's not just of you're trying to solve an opportunity cost problem of the team. There's the opportunity cost of the time spent on that solution is time not spent on another solution. So this gets to my next set of questions. As firms are looking to incorporate AI, my own company included, we have a decision to make about the use of vendor-supplied AI tools or getting embedded throughout software. If you have large enterprise platforms, it's already woven in there. But we also have needs that are unique to us as a firm that we can't go by, say, competitively differentiating capabilities in software. By definition, they're unique to us, so we need to have some internal capability. So Tyler, starting with you, maybe help us think through what is that mix, one of, say, vendor offerings or prepackaged solutions versus in-house developed? Is there a way to be thinking about the right mix of off-the-shelf versus hand-rolled, basically?
Sure. So, I think tying back into your last question, it really all boils down to bet sizing, right? So, what is a good risk-adjusted bet on a particular outcome? If you're looking at things like internal workforce productivity type solutions, those are things that I would almost always go for buy versus build. And by buy could mean finding a good existing product. So like in support, for instance, like Zendesk for customer support and messaging, those types of things. Those tools have come a really long way, really fast. And so they're certainly not perfect, but in terms of being able to hit the ground running really quick and avoid a potentially long R&D boondoggle, I think that buying is the way to go. When you get closer to product development and innovation, I think that's where it gets to be a much trickier, more nuanced question. And so, do you want to develop the talent in-house, but be faced with a relatively high likelihood of eating a pretty big bill? or do you want to work with a contractor who's done this before and can have some largely templatized solutions that they can pull out? So I think you have to really figure out how novel is the problem that you're trying to solve versus is this something that someone has developed a set of professional practices around that they could largely rinse and repeat, something that they've done in the past, so the likelihood of their success relative to your capital outlay is pretty high. Whereas if you're solving an unknown problem for an indeterminate amount of time, the variance on that bet grows pretty quickly. So it's a long-winded way of saying it depends. But generally, if you're an organization that doesn't have a very mature R&D function and doesn't know how to wade through the other important questions like, will someone buy this? You don't know how to do the market, you don't know how to do the appropriate market research, you don't know how to measure things. I would say lean more towards working with contractors. If you're already in the business of doing a lot of innovation and you have that muscle memory built up, then trying to develop that capability in-house, I think, becomes a better long-term play.
So I'm guessing there's a mix of people in our audience who would be data scientists themselves. Maybe some are also decision makers for their organizations. So this how to match the capabilities of these advanced analytic approaches to an organization's needs. It's an important one. I don't know, Zach or Amrutha, if you guys have a point of view on that as well.
Yeah, so I'm a bit biased. I run a data science company, so I'm all about the contractors. But how I like to explain it is, there's a certain point in companies where they want to have an in-house counsel versus when they're just using a law firm. You can make this for any specialist position inside a company and all that. And I feel like it's the same story for data scientists. It takes a really special company that needs a full-on R&D department working internally. They have to have a lot of data. They have to have a lot of data problems. And most companies I've seen just don't have that and would be better served by contractors, consultants, or what have you, so long as it's tied to actual production. Because otherwise it really does become a boondoggle where you're spending 3 times as much as what you could with an internal team or something like that. But the position of a data scientist, in my view at least, is so specialized. It's such a different beast compared to typical development. Even AI engineering in general kind of falls into that practice as well, that you really have to have an honest discussion about whether or not, do we really need to have this, and are those people going to be fully utilized towards the task? Or are they going to be spinning their wheels? Or are you just doing a kind of an idea farming to see if you can grow out a product from there?
Let me ask one follow-up question, then Amrita, I'd love to hear from you. How do you know if you're going to bring either a contract or an employee resource in? How does a company make sure that they've prepared the soil, as it were? What are the preconditions for success? If you were going to establish that, what needs to be true?
Yeah. So Amrutha actually brought this up a little bit earlier. Do they have data resources? Do they have a maturity of technological practice, in the sense that they know how to vet and think about software ideas and that sort of thing? Usually what I would say, regardless of whether you want to bring someone in or out, what I would do is consult an expert. There's many out there. Have them do a road mapping session with you. Have an idea session going through and think about the ways that it could fit into your business process as a whole. It's a lot better than going in and just trying to hire the best person on paper. I can't stress enough, it's very easy to throw jargon around. It's extremely easy. I can be up here and I can talk about linear combinations of orthonormal vectors and blah, 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 blah. Sounds really impressive. What did I just describe? Adding. And it's very easy to do that and kind of get through the resume structure. So what I would recommend is doing at least an initial scoping with someone from the field who's reputable and has a history of it, and then make a decision for your business at that point.
Yeah, I want to add to that real quick. If you are hiring your first data science resource, make sure it is not their first data science job.
Yeah.
There's a maturing period. Usually takes several years of, because schools don't really teach this stuff very well, to be honest with you. they don't teach the application and the art and kind of the nuances of it. And there's a lot of building the bike while you're trying to ride it, and you don't want to do that on your dime. So I would always recommend that if a company is going to go down the path of hiring an internal data science resource, they hire someone who is more senior and someone who could potentially build that function up within their organization. But you don't want to hire someone that's junior just because they're cheaper, because you will spend far more money and have far more gray hair as a result.
Yeah, and a big thing that happens too if you do get a junior person, so data science is kind of like the back end of the back end. So are most of the AI things. And if they are unaware of something and they just screw up a little thing, it's going to be sitting inside of your product or any service that you have like a little bomb just waiting to go
The
off.
high interest credit card of technical debt.
Yeah, it's the worst kind. We have a lot of stories collectively about this kind of stuff, and you want to be able to avoid that as much as possible, and finding a good partner early on to at least assess your company and say if it needs to be internal versus not. If you're hiring someone, you need a management apparatus around them, something that I didn't appreciate when I was an employee, and that's a whole other skill set on top of it.
Yeah, I'll just add, like, this discussion just reminds me of a time that I got pretty pissed at one of my jobs because someone else in another department recommended a product that I felt like my team could have built. And I was upset that we didn't get to do the creative work because most data scientists love a problem. We actually like breaking our heads against the wall until we fix it. But I remember talking to my VP at the time just about, should we buy this or should we build it? And it probably a really good learning moment for me. As Zach said, like, I'm biased in a way because I run my own consulting and I love building things, right? But some things we looked at was the cost itself. But another thing that I would not have thought about until I talked with Schwartz, and I'll name him because I adored working with him, was actually the integration of that vendor or tool into your workflow and into your data and things like that. Because it may be cheaper in the beginning, or it may be cheaper when you look at the sticker price, but if it doesn't actually integrate into your workflows or your data that you're feeding into it, you're then hiring or making someone internally do all the work to make that integration be smooth. And then I think, as Zach's mentioned too, is just making sure that you have someone from your team working with this vendor or contractor very closely. So in the event that you do decide to kind of take a different path, you have less cost or less like knowledge being lost when you cut off that relationship or decide you don't want that product anymore.
So as we look then building these scenarios that internal company, and I love your illustration that you had an internal capability as a team and you felt passed over in a way. So how then, and maybe Tyler, I'll start with you then, for a good hypothesis-driven model, if I'm considering a business problem for which a data science approach might be an appropriate answer, how should I be thinking about developing a hypothesis-driven approach and making sure that there's clear boundaries around what success look like? Talk through that a little bit with us.
So I tend to take a really probabilistic lens to these types of issues. So I would start with a bounding box. So what's the best case outcome? What's the worst case outcome? What's the median outcome? What is my confidence interval around that outcome? And then if you can't answer those questions, you might not understand your system very well. And so starting to develop a picture of what is the distribution of possible outcomes and possible impacts within whatever system that I'm trying to affect. So I like to, customer churn is a really good one. Sales forecasting is another good one. So
can you give us some specifics? Put some meat on the bones, because you're speaking in a very generalized way.
Yeah.
Let's take churn for an example. Talk about a bounding box. What precisely would an effective hypothesis in customer churn look like?
So you could say, what would it take for me to reduce churn by 10%? What is the probability of that, and what are the specific dials that I have? So an example of that could be implementing a new chatbot, because I've actually seen this done. So will customers who use this specific chat agent have their needs met more quickly than another cohort or customers, and is the distribution of churn probabilities or time to churn within that customer cohort lower than the control group that hasn't been using the AI chatbot. So you basically set up an experiment. You split a population of your users. Some of them get access to the enhanced AI enhanced system. The other ones do not. And then you have a target metric, which is basically survival time. So from the birth of the contract through the death of the contract over an observation period, is the distribution of survival times different within these groups? And once you've posed it in that way, it's a relatively simple statistical hypothesis testing problem. You say, well, over this period of time, are the distributions different? If they are different, and one is less, then the hypothesis was, confirmed.
So a customer churn metric equates to dollars very easily for a business leader. But there are other applications that don't.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're dealing with you're dealing with opportunity cost of labor in terms of an employee base or any of that. So Amrutha, Zach, do either of you have a point of view on a specific scenario where you've seen it be affected on a not so explicitly financial a measure as customer churn?
Yeah, I can jump to this. This was actually one of the earliest data science stuff that I worked on in my career. This was back in 2010. I was at corporate at a Marsh Supermarkets. I can name them because they're no longer around, which makes it a lot easier then. So we had a huge problem at Marsh Supermarkets, and grocery as a whole, if you're unaware, has 2% margins. We had a store downtown Lockerbie, if you're familiar with the area, that did $100,000 of business a day, and they kept $2,000 of it. It's absolutely insane what happens inside a grocery. It's absolutely insane, when you think about the business that's going through. And Marsh had a really, really big problem. What would happen is that the stores would forget to put on their merchandising orders. Now, it's like, what would happen then? The help desk would go call them, try and get them in there, get those orders in, all that good stuff. And let's think about that for a second. The problem with grocery stores is the stuff on the shelf spoils. So if you're putting in an order that you don't know what the hell you're buying, and you have stuff hanging out in the back room, that stuff is literally spoiling. And on top of it, you finance all that stuff too. So you have an insurance cost that's associated with it and all that good stuff too. And the data science problem that sat in there, in the very middle of that, was assessing, okay, where are our problem stores? What are the common features of the problem stores? What are the anomalies we have? And what are the strategies that we can take in order to reduce that down? And at the end of the day, it didn't sound like a data science solution, but it was literally just putting up a leaderboard with the store managers and saying, hey, you are way above the benchmark of what we expect. You should improve that behavior and reduce down your missed order stores. We dropped it by 80%. We saved something like $3 million per quarter based off of that. And it was this human process that was informed by data and what our help desk was collecting in various forms like that. And it gets to the experimental side that Tyler was talking to as well. A lot of data science in general, this is a differentiation between AI and all that, is presenting a new lens to see your data in a completely different way. Math is all about projections and thinking about things, reducing dimensions, making it as simple as possible. So with your two eyes, you can actually find a solution. And almost every problem can be divided up that way so that you can piece it out and then say, because I observed this, therefore I must do that. And it's the coolest thing in the world. And that's where you really have impact. And then the AI stuff after that's pretty darn easy. You just import from somewhere and you're ready to rock and roll. Yeah, but no, that right there is a huge thing. You think about these operational things. You're in a large organization. You probably have repeated processes that are going on. Let's say that you have an incredible employee that gets it 99% right for every process that changes after it. Within 20 steps, you're going to have probably about a 20% 20% rate of error. That means that your employee, even though they're 99% accurate all the time, is almost guaranteed to fail 1 out of 5 times. and you think about that from a data science perspective and think about how you can actually fix it. It's incredible stuff. It's the highlight of this job.
Amrita, any thoughts?
I'll add quickly that like I'm trying to break into the mental health space, and I'm just very interested in it. And I was looking at a company, and they were asking for a matching or ranking algorithm to connect patients and therapists better. So I don't know like what they currently do, but I thought like the challenge was just an interesting problem to solve. What I find kind of wrong with their phrasing in a way is we can do that, but what outcome do you really want to track? Like just making faster pairs is not that great, really. We can just do them randomly and it's faster, you know? But looking at things, and again, I speak from a very healthcare specific space, but looking at things like, if you can create a better matching algorithm, does that mean that patients are actually sticking to treatment, or what we call a treatment adherence, better? Are we seeing that they have less ED visits or hospital admissions? Do we see like less, or kind of like the kinds of reasons they're in a hospital or the codes that they come in for, are those changing? And so when we talk about like having hypothesis-centric, even when you talk to a data scientist, honestly, use AI like Claude or anything to retranslate what you want from the business and just say, I'm talking to a data scientist, how do I rephrase this, you know? But I think it's very important to have specific outcomes that are not just about the dollar sign, but actually about the value to the customer at the end. And in my example, it's the patient. So how do they actually benefit from this matching algorithm?
So one of the things that we talked about as we prepared for our panel, and I think is already shown up here, it's if we saw AI in the title of the session, what we're really talking about is an empirical approach to business problems that includes numerical analysis of all different kinds. And so I do want to finish with the last quick question for each of you. Let's get to AI specifically, because what you have described is empiricism applied to business practice. I wouldn't even say it's data science per se, just it's disciplined problem solving. But AI itself as a subdomain, each of you, and we'll start with Tyler at the end, just a time what you see emerging with AI as a technique specifically that's really interesting.
So I would say the thing for me, and having spent better part of 15 years doing data science before I moved into the investment world, still doing data science, just a little different. So much time was dedicated to cleansing data, extracting from unstructured data sets, knowledge to then do basic statistics and modeling downstream on it. The things that we would spend months trying to develop natural language processing algorithms which could extract the nuggets and then do anything from trend detection, anomaly detection on documents, social media messages, all this sort of stuff. It is almost trivially easy to do that now, and so I think that the ability to use AI for data mining is something that's going to pick up, but I think it will also re-emphasize the importance of classical statistics to interpret that data.
Yeah, I'm just going to further that. I think the coolest thing about AI is it's a new kind of infrastructure, and that's how it should be treated. Not as the actual feature itself, but as something that makes doing things with technology significantly easier. Like Tyler was saying, 80% of the work was trying to figure out something so that you could actually do the really cool stuff down the line using raw inputs, and now it's much, much easier, and I'm very excited about it.
And remembering what library to use.
Yeah.
I'm with it.
I think for me, like where I see AI being really helpful in the next few decades is, yes, there's a lot of technological advancements, but I actually think it could help bridge the gap between a lot of like knowledge gaps, even across other countries. Like entering the data science AI space a couple of years ago, that's actually how I started to diversify my friend group or my workforce and things like that. So I actually really hope that we see more AI work in coming from other countries, because something that I think that the U.S. could use or benefit from is actually seeing examples of how people have solved problems around the world.
Excellent. Well, thank you for taking time to talk through AI with us. Our panelists will be available right after. We do have a hard stop, so thanks for listening and joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.